In one of my last videos, I went through every major architectural styles of APIs, REST APIs, GraphQL, SOAP, gRPC, WebSockets, webhooks, WebRTC. Those are how APIs communicate, how the data moves. But there's another way to categorize APIs that is just as important, and that's by who gets to use them, the access types. Because the same REST API can be public, private, the architecture doesn't change, the access types can change. Today, we're going to go over 4 types of APIs by access: public APIs, private APIs, partner, composite. And we're going to use the same bookstore example from the last video, public API. The public API is also called an open API. It's the one that any developer can access. You sign up, you get an API key, you start building. The whole point of it being public is reach. The company wants as many developers as possible to integrate with their platform, because more integrations means more user, more data, and a bigger ecosystem. In our bookstore example, for example, a public API might look like this. Any developer in the world can hit this endpoint. They can build apps that search our bookstore catalog, display book reviews, recommend titles. We don't know who they are in advance. We don't have a business relationship with these people, these developers. We just give them an API and tell them, go ahead. So if you're a developer, you've probably used one of these. Google Maps API, you've probably seen it in delivery apps, real estate sites, travel platforms. Stripe API, any developer can use it to integrate payment into their app. Open weather map, you want weather data, you sign up, you get a key, you start calling. The trade-off with public APIs is control. If you are building a public API, you are giving the world access to your data and to your services. That means you need strong authentication, you need strong documentation, you need proper versioning so you don't break someone's app when you update something on the API. And you need rate limiting so no one can overwhelm your service. And by the way, public API does not mean free, because if it's public doesn't mean it is free. There are usually business models behind it. So there are freemium ones that is free up to a usage limit. For example, I think on Splash, the other day I was trying to use on Splash, I think you can get their APIs to, you can call the APIs to get photos, I think 50 calls per day or something. And there are the pay per use ones where you pay for every request, like OpenAI charges per token. Stripe takes a percentage per transaction. And there are the completely free ones like government or non-profit APIs. NASA has public APIs. You can get Mars rover photos for free. But here's something you should know about companies that offer public APIs. Take Stripe, for example. Stripe does not need to convince every business individually to access payment. They built an API. Developers integrate the API. And now Stripe is processing payments in millions of applications without having to sell to each one of them. So the API is this distribution strategy in this case. And that's like massive business insights. Next up, we have private APIs. They're also called internal APIs. It's literally the opposite of public API. It's not for the outside world. It's for your own team, your own application, your own system. If our bookstore had a private API, it would have something like this. Do you notice the difference? This response include cost data, sales price, profit margin. We wouldn't want to expose that kind of information in a public API. That's internal business data, right? Our inventory team needs it. Finance team needs it. Our pricing algorithm needs it. So it lives in a private API that only our internal systems can call. Private APIs are everywhere. Every company that has more than one application or service is almost certainly using private APIs, even if they don't call them that explicitly. When your company's mobile app talks to your backend, that's a private API. When your payment service talks to your order service, that's a private API. When your admin dashboard pulls data from the database, that's a private API. If you work at any company that builds software, you're probably using private APIs. The benefit of private APIs is speed and flexibility, because the only customer are your own teams. You can move faster. You can change things without worrying about breaking external developers' app. You can expose sensitive data that shouldn't leave your network. I was reading something about private APIs the other day, and I stumbled on this story. Around 2002, Jeff Bezos sent a memo at Amazon that basically said that everything must communicate with every other thing via API. So no shared database, no backdoor function calls. If you want data from another thing in the same company, you go through their API like an outsider customer would. And anyone who didn't comply would be fired. I mean, it sounds a little extreme, but this is why AWS exists. Amazon got so good at building internal APIs for themselves that they realized that they could sell the same infrastructure to other companies. S3, EC2, all of AWS started as Amazon's internal APIs that then later became public products. So internal APIs, when done well, can become external products. The trade-off is that private APIs sometimes get less love because there's nobody outside depending on them. So documentation can be lazy if there even is any. And versioning can get sloppy, technical debt can build up. But in a perfect world, the same standard you enforce for a public API, clean documentation, stable versioning, proper error handling. Those are the same standards that you should actually apply to your private APIs as well. Next up is the partner API. It kind of sits between public and private. It is not open to anybody, but it is not locked inside your company either. It is shared with specific trusted business partners under a formal agreement. Think of Partners API as a VIP entrance to a club. Not everybody can walk in, but if you've been approved, you can get access to some things that the general public wouldn't have access to. So in our bookstore API, for example, we might have a partner API for publishers that is different from the public API. So the publisher can push their catalog directly into our system, including OSIS price, stock availability. That's not information we want to give to a random developer, but Penguin Random House, publishing house, has a business agreement with us. So we give them deeper access. For example, Spotify's partner API lets record labels manage their catalog and view streaming analytics. Amazon partner API lets sellers manage inventory, pricing, orders. Bank share APIs, partner APIs with fintech companies, for example, for account aggregation. So partner APIs are very important. They are typically stricter to get into. You don't just sign up and get a key and that's it. With partner APIs, there's usually a vetting process, legal agreement, sometimes even a technical review. Developers from both sides will probably be involved. The access in this case is controlled, it is monitored, and it is revocable. The trade-off here is overhead. Maintaining that kind of like two-side relationship is work. You need dedicated support. You need SLAs, service level agreements, basically a promise of what the API will do between both parties. You need to handle the situation when a partner's access needs to be changed or revoked. And the last one is Composite API. A Composite API combines multiple API calls into one. So instead of the client making 3 separate requests to 3 separate endpoints, the client makes one request to the Composite API, and the Composite API handles all the internal calls, returns one unified response. So you go to a restaurant, you are ordering a meal at a restaurant. Instead of ordering the burger separately and the fries separately and the drinks separately, you order all at once in one single transaction, right? So in our bookstore, say a customer opens the app and we need to show a product page. We need book details from the book service. We need author information from the author service. We need reviews from the review service. We need stock availability from the inventory service. Without a Composite API, our front end would have to make 4 separate calls, 4 round trip, 4 network calls. And if any of those 4 happen to be slow, the whole page is slow. But with a Composite API, we can get it all with one call, one response, everything. So the Composite APIs orchestrate all the internal calls behind the scene. This is very useful in microservice architecture where different pieces of data live in different services. Without a Composite API, the front end will unfortunately have to become the orchestrator, making call after call. But with a Composite API, the backend literally handles the coordination and the front end can stay clean. If you watch the architectural style video I made, you might be thinking that GraphQL is sort of composite by default, and that's correct. A single GraphQL query can already touch multiple resources and return them in one response. So if you are using GraphQL, you're already doing some composite style operations. The trade-off is complexity. Composite APIs are more complex to build and to maintain. And honestly, a Composite API is not really an access type in the who can see it sense. It is more about what the API does, but it's commonly listed with this group. So in summary, public API, anyone with an API key can access. That's maximum reach. That's less control. Private APIs is just for your own internal team. You have maximum control, 0 external reach. While partner API, used with trusted third parties with a formal agreement, you have controlled access, deeper integration. And Composite API, this one is less about who accesses the API and more about combining multiple operations into one single call. And remember, these are independent from the architectural styles we covered last time. A REST API can be a public REST API or a private REST API. A GraphQL API can be a public GraphQL or a private GraphQL API. gRPC is almost always private. SOAP is often partner. Every API has both an architectural type and an access type. They're like 2 different choices that you combine. So our bookstore might have a public API for developers, a private API for internal microservices, partner APIs for publisher, a Composite API to power the mobile apps product page. They're not mutually exclusive. They're kind of like layers. So that is it for API access type. If you haven't seen the video on API architectural styles, go and watch that one too. Together, both videos give you like a full picture of how APIs are categorized. Thank you for watching, and I hope you loved it, and I'll see you in the next one.